Okay, I'm going to read some more from the Divine Illiad too. I've been going over this book today and finding so much that I needed to reread and remember. And here Russell is talking about the entire cycle of motion. We only see one side. So I'll take up here. If we could see the whole two ways of entire cycles of motion, God might as well not have created the universe of cause and effect at all. We should all know it for what it is and would see both cause and effect at once. There would be no actors in the divine drama of creation, for we would see the illusion of it and know there is no universe of motion, nor of life and death, nor of good or evil, nor of any of the opposites that comprise every effect of motion. If our senses could detect the invisible reaction to every action, there would be no sense of time, nor motion, nor change, for everything would seemingly stand still. Every motion in one direction would be voided by its opposite. Even time would stand still. Its backward flow would void its forward flow. If our senses could detect the backward flow of time, there would be no sequence to anything, hence time itself would disappear. Space will not permit a greater explanation of this phenomena of motion here, but those of you who have the secret of light may already be familiar with the voidance principle and the spiral principle of this electric universe, in which everything in nature is forever turning inside out and outside in, to cause that great characteristic of nature which causes everything to appear, disappear, and reappear in sequential cycles. And I will put the secret of light over into the description bar if you want to hear that read. In this fact of nature, familiar to everyone, lies the basis of an understanding of what happens to our bodies after they disappear. Please note that I did not say after death, but after they disappear. For if they actually do die, that would be the end. But our cosmic knowing tells us that they disappear in order to reappear as one part of the continuity of all things, of all creating things. Our senses have no way of detecting the illusions of motion. They but record those illusions as a photograph negative likewise records them. The senses have no awareness of the fact of nature that all things which are happening are simultaneously unhappening, as though all moving things are walking into a mirror in which their reflection is passing through them, going the other way. Such facts of the invisible universe cannot be sensed. They can only be known by mind. Our senses cannot know anything at all. They are but electric waves of two-way light and can but sense. But mind can know everything which lies within and beyond the range of sensing. It is our knowing which will complete the range of the whole cycle for us, of which our senses can record so very little. Knowledge alone will answer the long unanswered questions, and we have not had sufficient knowledge to answer them until this electric age made it possible to see behind the illusions of motion and know the whole range of God's creating processes. During our unfolding eons, our senses have told us that our bodies are ourselves and that we are many separate beings who live and die. Our senses have told us that matter and motion are real, and the evidences of our senses is our sole reliance. Until very recently, one would not have understood if told that his body of matter in motion had no reality whatsoever, that it was pure illusion of seeming motion, and that the illusion belonged equally to the visible and invisible universes. It is quite strange that people do not yet know that matter and space are equal and opposite mates, which continually interchange, that which is matter becoming space, and that which is space becoming matter, and that this interchange repeats itself forever and forever. It never ceases, except to our senses, which record seeming beginnings and endings, which we call birth and death. The time has come when we must know that there is a continuity between deaths and births, which has its own unfoldings, just as there is a continuity between births and deaths. Every creating thing lives equally in the visible and invisible universes, and interchanges with it constantly. This does not mean people alone. Everything alike in the visible universe interchanges constantly with the invisible universe. The apple, the tree, the flower, and even the planet, sun, and stars of heaven. Everyone knows that we breathe out from our bodies into space, and that we breathe into our bodies from space. But people have never realized just what that means. Every outward breath of man is his death. Part of him dies at every outward breath. The part that dies goes into the invisible universe of the heavens and to the earth. A man cannot sense that part of him, which is constantly dying, but a dog can sense it sufficiently to follow these dying particles for days. Now let us give thought to these dying particles of our bodies for a moment. We do not grieve and weep because of their deaths, do we? We do not care for them or even give thought to their disappearance, do we? No, of course not. Why? Because we are through with them. They have served their purposes, and we have created other particles to replace them. The only time we weep is when the cycle is finished. Now let us consider the replaced particles. What are they? They are newly born parts of our bodies. They have been born to continue the ideal of John Jones or Jane Smith. We give no thought to them, but it is a fact that neither John nor Jane are the same bodies they were a moment ago. Breath and rebirth have transformed them. They are continually being transformed. In this example is an explanation of the processes of nature in continuing John Jones and Jane Smith by forever transforming the forms of their bodies by a repetition of sequential deaths and births from babyhood until old age. During that period of transformation, John and Jane were never the same in appearance and form for even one moment. This transformation never ceases. We think it ceases at its cycle's end because our limited senses cannot reach beyond that seeming end which we call death. Universal continuity. In order to logically build up an understanding of what happens after death of the whole body, let us consider what happens after the death of parts of the body, which are constantly being thrown off into space. Here's a fact of nature which man has never considered. It has to do with that fact of nature before referred to, that every visible action has its invisible reaction, constituting a two-way flow of all creating things. For every visible forward flow, there is an invisible backward flow. Each of these voids the other. Therefore, nothing actually happens except the deception to our senses. They sense but one way of it, and we call it motion, time, and change. Let us consider what happens in space to void what is happening in the visible universe. As nature unfolds her forms, she simultaneously refolds them in the seed of these forms. As the oak tree unfolds outward toward the heavens, it also refolds inwards toward its seed. That is God's plan of recording every action by enfolding the pattern of that action in its seed for repetition. The oak tree is continually being transformed, just as Jane and John and all creating things are being transformed. And we call that transformation growth. And what is growth? Now, what is growth? Actually, it is a series of sequential births and deaths. There are more births than deaths in the first half of any life cycle, and more deaths than births in the last half. But that preponderance is balanced by space by the very opposite until the rebirth of the body from the recorded seed. Another question, what is the seed? The seed is an electrochemical record of the form pattern of an unfolding ideal. That electric record is ultra-microscopic in size and has almost no motion. It is formless, yet in it is the entire pattern of the body of man or oak or whatever ideal it records. The seed is a tomb in which the death of the body it records is buried for resurrection into birth of life. Centering the patterned record is the still light which is God, from whose imagination the form of that ideal extended in the two lights of his electric thinking to interweave that form into his image. That still light of God, which centers all creating things, is the soul of the ideal, which the patterned form manifests, whether that form be oak, tree, violet, man, or planet. For all creating things are centered by soul, just as they are centered by mind. Soul is universal, as mind and thinking of mind are universal. God is the one soul. Soul is desire in God to manifest form of ideal. Soul in the oak tree is desire to manifest the ideal of the oak. Likewise, soul in man is desire to manifest the ideal of man. Soul is the desire quality of the light, just as truth is the quality of balance. Soul is the fulcrum from which the electric wave of motion extends to express desire in form. The word soul is used to define a quality of the God mind, just as love, truth, balance, and the law are used. Its connotation differs from the connotation of love, but all of the qualities of God are one, even though we have to use different words to express them. If God were without desire to create, the word soul would have no meaning. Soul and creator have practically the same meaning. Many people believe that each man has an individual soul, and also believe that animals and lower forms of life are without souls. God the Creator centers ever creating thing and extends his desire, or love, into ever creating thing. And that means not only the ideal itself, but each particle of matter which constitutes the body of each ideal. Every corpuscle in the body of man, blade of grass, or atom of iron is centered by the invisible light of the one soul of the visible universe. Each particle is an extension of every other particle. Each particle is an extension of every other particle. I read that twice. Each particle has a purpose, and that purpose is recorded as a whole in the seed pattern. When therefore you hear of people talking about saving their souls from sin, or such references to the soul as that, you may in the future know how inconsistent that is with nature. One might as well talk about saving God from sin. Knowing this fact of nature to record the forward flow of unfolding growth simultaneously with a refolding backward flow toward its seed, it can plainly be seen that there can be no such thing as death or permanent disappearance of anything whatsoever. There can be but a transformation from that one form to another form of the same thing, and a repetition of that same thing forever. Seeming multiplicity of souls. Many people ask this question: if reincarnation is a characteristic of nature, how do you account for the fact that once there were very few people on the planet, and now there are hundreds of millions? How did they all get souls? How did so many reincarnate from so few? The answers are simple. Everything in nature is an extension of itself. This is a thought wave universe. Every thought or ideal is expressed in form by waves of motion, which multiplies itself throughout the universe by repeating that form. Consider a wave of water. If you throw a stone in water, you produce a waveform, which is the exact measure of potential energy used by disturbing the stillness of the calm water. That one wave is not just yours alone, it is universal. So that wave repeats itself throughout the whole body of water. The many waves are extensions of the one. Each wave is a lever, which oscillates upon a fulcrum. Everywhere throughout a body of water is a still fulcrum for each wave lever to swing upon. Every fulcrum of stillness corresponds to the soul, which God extends everywhere to center every repetition of his thinking. As there is but one omnipresent soul, everyone has the same soul, but everyone has not the same desire within his centering soul. Likewise, with man or sparrow or salmon in the sea, the exact pattern and the exact intensity of desire to create that pattern is registered in the seed, which may be 1, 10, or 100,000 in number. All are extensions of the one, and all are repetitions, or reincarnations, if you like, of the man or sparrow or salmon from which they are extended. The children of man are reincarnated extensions of man, just as waves of the sea are repeated extensions of their parent waves. This brings up another question asked by doubters. The child of John Jones is another person, another individual person who may not be at all like John Jones. If the child is an extension of his father, why is he not mentally like his father as well as physically? It is because all that a man registers in his seed is his body pattern. He does not record his mind in the seed, for mind is universal, nor does he necessarily record his desire. Mind cannot be inherited from the seed of man, for mind is everywhere to act as a fulcrum, which the soul is, of every extended reproduction. John Jones has but extended his body pattern and electrical potential, just as waves of the sea extend their patterns and potentials to other waves. The still soul fulcrum, which centers John, is still his alone, for the omnipresent light provides fulcrum souls for every extension of John Jones, just as the ocean provides fulcrums for every wave of the sea. It must not be lost sight of that souls are not separate things, even though each man unit of creation has his own soul. So also every planet and sun has its own center of gravity, even though every planet in our solar system is an extension of the sun. The body of the planet was extended from the sun, but not its center of gravity. That center is a part of the universal balance. It is the still point of the light of God, which centers all things. Very few men have children who inherit their so-called talents or genius. Talent or genius springs from desire, and desire is not inherited from parents. We inherit all mind and desire from God in all its fullness, but the awareness of it is unequal in all body extensions of mind. This recalls another confusion among doubters of reincarnation. Many ask, is my individuality lost when I reincarnate in another body? Does some great genius in music or other arts lose their identity or individuality when he comes back? If he cannot pass it on to his children, how can he ever continue his own genius in another body? And suppose he does not have children, then what? Individuality is never lost. A genius will reincarnate as a genius and continue in the next body where he left off in his last body. A child musical prodigy remembers the desires of his last body and repeats them. His desire has been recorded in his soul, and that desire in his soul will be extended into another body to find expression. A genius such as Mozart continually reincarnates his self through everyone whom he re-inspires with his genius. Everyone who takes on an awareness of that genius and is re-inspired by it becomes a reincarnation of the self of Mozart to the extent of his awareness. Bodies are many, but mind is but one. He who is illumined with the light of another mind self becomes that other one. That is the very essence of reincarnations. Bodies repeat through the seed, but mind repeats through mind. Even the greatest genius can reincarnate only his body through his seed, but his self must be reincarnated through other inspired selves. Desire for body beget body, and the soul of a genius will always find a body to repeat in and continue his unfolding, just as a lesser intellect will find the body of his desire to continue his unfolding. When mind of man expresses his knowing and his awareness of God in him to mind of another man, he becomes one with the other mind. Those who are confused by the ideal of reincarnation forget that there is but one mind or one soul, but there are countless bodies which are centered by the one mind soul. These many bodies have a varying awareness of God in them, which they discover gradually, but the entirety of the God mind awaits that fullness of awakening in everyone. The genius or mystic is one who has become more illumined by God's knowing than other men who have hardly begun to know God in them. But if one of lesser knowing is even very little bit inspired or uplifted by the thinking of the genius, he becomes that genius to the measure of his inspiration. That is the way God talks to all mankind. The more illumined reincarnate in the lesser illumined by inspiring them with their knowing. In this manner, all mankind is gradually uplifted throughout the ages of man's unfolding. In this manner, each thinking man gradually becomes a part of every other man. In this manner, those of little knowing gradually become illumined with all knowing. That is what is meant by the omnipresence of mind. Mind is everywhere. It centers all things which move around its still centers. Every thought of every man is echoed and radared to every other man in the universe. Mankind has not yet unfolded to the extent of his awareness of it, but when that time eventually comes on this planet, the whole play of the man ideal on this planet will be finished, and all men will become cosmically one. Then countless millions of individuals will lose their individuality in their universality. Everyone in this electric age fully comprehends the fact that any man who speaks from one point on this planet speaks from every other point. Man can recondense the sound of a voice anywhere he wishes. The time will come in man's unfolding when the silent thought waves from which the sounds extend will be recondensed in everyone's consciousness at will. Man may be 1,000,000 years from that stage of his unfolding, but it will someday come. God's recording system continues its recording through cycles of unfolding forever. Any state of motion in God's universe once started never ends. Every thought of every man is a state of motion. Its recording becomes still by finding rest in its seed. The leaf of the oak tree, which we see in its oak tree form, loses its form in its electric record, which God folds up in a formless seed, but it unfolds again into the oak tree in its next cycle. The disappearance of the oak leaf is not its end. We see the dried, decaying leaf disintegrating into the earth from which it came. It is no longer green, nor does the sap of life flow through it. Spring comes, however, and the living green leaf of the oak, which disappeared last autumn, reappears again in the spring. Likewise, great or small events in our lives are thoughts which disappear into past time. They fade and die like the dried leaf of the oak or the dead body of a friend. But those thoughts are not forgotten by God. He records every one of them in our soul consciousness and enfolds their patterns in microscopic electrochemical records, which become permanent states of motion. These records are what we call memories. Memories are thoughts or events which have disappeared into the past. These memories are not dead, for we can reincarnate them at any time. The recalling of a dead memory is exactly the same in principle as the reincarnation of a man. For man is but an accumulation of thoughts which have a body, just as every thought has a body. Every body and every form is expressed in light waves. So is every thought expressed in light waves? So is every thought expressed in light waves. Light waves are universal. Each one reaches to the far ends of the universe. In this manner, God records every thought, every event or experience in any man's life in the soul seed of every other man. When all men become sufficiently telepathic to resurrect any thought or memory of any other man, we will then have become that unity, in fact, which we now are only in theory. Both our sensing and our conscious knowing are too limited for us to realize our unity as one being. As our knowing extends, our sensing will also extend. They will then supplement each other. One can readily understand that this great divine drama of creation could not be as it is if God extended the boundaries of our senses to infinity. If our senses followed the entire cycle of the unfolding and refolding of any creating thing, there would be no change whatsoever in anything. That is why we must rise above our sensing and become cosmic in our knowing. When one arrives at that stage, he no longer looks upon death of a loved one as the end. Everything that loved one was, still is. The body has disappeared from sense awareness, but it must reappear, as the dawn must reappear after it disappears. We never realize that our senses have never seen the loved one, we have but seen his body. We knew the loved one whom we have never seen, however, and we still know him. The disappearance of his body into the tomb means no more than his disappearance to another country would mean. Again I say, we still know the man, even though his body has disappeared. For the self of man is his knowing and his thinking, and not his body. When his body has disappeared, his knowing and his thinking are still as alive as ever. Our love for him can extend to him and his love to us whenever we desire it, exactly as we can bring the dead body of a memory back to life at any time we desire it by recollecting the dead cycle. By recollecting the dead cycle, we reborn it when we wish. Why do we love a departed one so? Because he has become a part of us and we of him. Well, so do we love Mozart or Shakespeare, or thousands of philosophers, writers, painters, and sculptors, and others whose lives have indelibly integrated into ours. They are a part of us. They live in us. Did you ever think of that when you wonder if you retain your individuality as John Jones after death of the body? Have you also wondered what your individuality is?